Hey, everybody, welcome to a very special edition to our Non-Sequitur podcast. We have with us today Dr. Richard Carrier, who's an American historian, atheist activist, author, public speaker, and blogger. He's been gracious enough to come in and start talking to us a little bit about some of the things he writes about, like the historicity of Jesus and Christ mysticism. A couple of his books that he's written are like on the historicity of Jesus, why we might have reason to doubt or for doubt, and proving history, Bayes' theorem, and the quest for historical Jesus. And what we're going to be talking about is that and some other stuff that on paganism or whatever seems to come up. So real quick, let me introduce the guests that I have on here. We have Holy Kool-Aid, as everybody knows.
Hey guys.
Kool-Aid. We've got Ocean Keltoy. We got Reed. And we have David. So we got other people coming in. If you want to be part of the panel, please message me. I will try to get you the link. It is invite only if you request it. I cannot obviously put the link out for many different reasons, but if you want to be a part of this, come in and talk to Richard. Hey, let me know. I'll try to get you in. But Richard, hey, thanks for coming on to our podcast and our YouTube video here. And I've been very thankful for our correspondence that we've had so far, because you've been so cordial and trying to arrange this. And it's been an ordeal. It's been a couple, 1 month or two in the arrangement. So go ahead and introduce yourself to everybody and let's go from there.
Yeah. Hello. I'm Richard Carrier, PhD. Yeah. Author of many books. And public speaker, traveler, philosopher, blogger, do many things. And online, I teach online, lots of other stuff. Anything you want to know about me, if you want to join in on my online classes and stuff, it's all at richardcarrier.info. You can find my blog there, my Twitter feed, my Facebook feed, everything.
Now, most of it is centered around some kind of things dealing with Jesus mysticism, with the Bible, or theological nature, correct?
Yeah, well, ancient history and modern contemporary philosophy are the two branches of my life, right? So I do a lot of stuff where I argue about and conceptualize what atheists should believe, like what our philosophical worldview should be and things like that. So I write on that front. And that, of course, gets me in Christian apologists who think, we're all wrong about everything. So I have counter apologetics background based on that. The other side, of course, is history. So I do ancient history, and I do a lot of like comparing non-Christian and Christian attitudes and beliefs and stuff throughout the ancient world. And my latest book was The Scientist in the Early Roman Empire. So that reflects like my interest in ancient intellectual history, ancient science. So it's not always dealing with the Bible, but the Bible comes up in there. There's a whole chapter on Christian attitudes. And then, you see some evidence in the Bible of their anti-intellectualism, their, hostility to critical thinking and curiosity and the kind of values that you need for science to drive science. So I often find connections that are of interest to the atheist market who want to criticize religion or understand the role of religion in either opposing or promoting different things in our lives, democracy, science, all of that stuff. But then, of course, I'm well known for being the first to publish a peer-reviewed book, academic press monograph defending the view that Jesus didn't exist. No one had done that before. They'd done amateur works or published through outside peer review, but I was the first one to actually get an argument done to the standards of the field of biblical studies, making the case. And that's made me very popular in that respect. But then I do lots of other counter-apologetic stuff and, often asked to debate the resurrection. And I've written a lot of papers on that subject as well.
And you, of course, take it from a very scholarly point of view, right? I mean, you are obviously a very, very learned and erudite scholar.
It's both a blessing and a curse. That's the niche that I occupy. So people say oh, your books and your blogs are full of too many facts and it's too dense and with too many footnotes and stuff. It's well, that's what I do. And there are people who support that and like that. And it's the niche that I feel most comfortable in and see myself as the most useful doing. And then there are other people who take my work and will popularize it and use it in more colloquial presentations.
Do you think it's a fine line, though, sometimes where you're trying to do something scholarly? Like, I like science, right? I love science. And I am not an expert on anything, but I've got a decent education, I guess. And it's very difficult sometimes when you're explaining a concept to people that have never had exposure to the concepts you're talking about. Do you find that when it comes to theological things that it takes a lot of prerequisite knowledge, a lot of background knowledge to understand some of the arguments that you're trying to make?
Yeah, I mean, that mostly comes up as a problem in debates. When you have a formal debate and you're up against the clock, you don't have time to explain to someone the miles of bullshit that underlies an argument that was just presented to you by the Christian opponent. yeah, there's a lot of backstory and understanding, but that's actually kind of one of the things that I see myself as helping people with. So on my blog, for example, and in several of my books, well, actually all my books, I write for both audiences, both the colloquial audience and, a common audience, lay people and experts. I try to hit both markets with colloquial language and to make things easy and intelligible. But then I back them up with all of the facts and details. So they're information dense, but my communication style is very relaxed and common people. And that I get criticism for that from hoity-toity scholars who think my style of writing is too colloquial. Like I use the word sucks, and they don't like that. Sucks, things like that. That's how I want to communicate. That's how I reach a wider audience. That's how I keep the material interesting. So a lot of what I do on my blog is like tackle those things. Like, here's some backstory on this thing that if you understand this, you'll understand the rest of it better. And so helping people with those kinds of things become smarter philosophers, smarter counter apologists, and more informed people. And that's really my mission in life. It's the niche I'm occupying.
Yeah, I think people learn differently. There's different pedagogical ways of approaching certain things, and people learn things at different rates. So I think that's absolutely great. I'm going to turn this over a little bit to Holy Kool. I know he's on a very limited time schedule right now. He's been nice enough to drop by. He's got some plans with his better half, so can't really get in the way of that, because it is a very special day. It's my birthday. That's what it is. No, but it is actually my birthday, but it's actually Valentine's Day. So
yeah, I was waiting for kind of a gap so I could jump in and wish you a happy birthday, Steve.
Thank you. That's something you're going to sing, and I've heard you sing. Don't do that.
I tried to post it on your wall on Facebook, but it wouldn't let me, and so I just wrote a comment on something from a few weeks ago just to be that guy. That guy.
No, you know what? People can post to my Facebook, but unfortunately, because of the amount of trollism out there and the trolls, I had to actually approve things, and it's unfortunate because I've had my Facebook for a long time, but since I've been out there on the internet, people have come in and vandalized my Facebook. So it is what it is.
That's why I blasted it with a dick pic album. I figured you'd appreciate it.
I loved it. It was great. I mean, you cannot ever get enough dick pics, I figure, right?
Yeah.
No, you can have them.
I'm a heterosexual white male with a collection of dick pics for no reason. I don't know.
I
monetize quite all right. Go for it.
To Richard real quick. And that's I'm not all the way through your book yet, but I've been reading on the historicity of Jesus. And there is one thing that you pointed out at the very beginning of it that I think is crucial to this conversation. And that's that you don't really have a leg in the horse, or a horse in the race, or a leg in the race, or whatever expression, or a leg in the horse.
Just throw any metaphor out that you want.
Definitely don't have a leg in the horse. But yes.
When it comes to whether or not Jesus existed, a lot of people make accusations that you're biased on this because you're an atheist and you're just trying to disprove the historicity of Jesus. But if Jesus actually existed, would it make any difference to you one way or another as far as your beliefs on the Bible?
Of course not. And that's what you point out. Like I point that out in the preface. It's so funny that people would accuse me of bias. What they're accusing me of is the absence of bias. I'm the one who doesn't care whether Jesus existed or not. I'd be happy to demonstrate that there was a mundane guy that got stories embellished about him over time. That's a great hypothesis. I think it's the next most plausible hypothesis after looking at all the evidence. I wish the evidence were strong enough to establish that. I think it would be extremely useful in a lot of ways. That's kind of what I was hoping I would find, is maybe enough evidence to sort of tip the scales in favor of historicity because what I'd done is people had encouraged me to read Earl Doherty's book, The Jesus Puzzle, after having encountered a lot of really bad Jesus mythicism. Most of the stuff is terrible. It's factually challenged and false, fallacious, and so on. And so I was very adamantly pro-historicist to say, don't send me the Jesus myth people. That stuff is terrible scholarship. I don't even want to have anything to do with it. And it's been, well, actually, you should read Earl Doherty's book. His book is actually more sane. It's reasonable, it's well-researched, and it doesn't do any of this crazy stuff. And it's, it's well fact-based and stuff. And we want to know what your opinion is that. And so I read that and I realized okay, actually he makes a pretty good case that is fairly sound. And I haven't seen a good rebuttal to it. And so I was an agnostic at that point. It's the historicity defenders really didn't have an answer to Doherty's thesis, but I didn't consider Doherty's thesis as proved at that point. So when my fans got together a postdoc research grant for me to complete project on this, and I did 6 years. Took me 6 years to do the research on it. I looked under every rock. I tried to look at every piece of evidence, every possible argument, and I realized, like, actually, Doherty's thesis holds up better than I thought when I first looked at it. Like, the historicity doesn't look as strong or secure. But even then, my end conclusion is at the top end of my error of margin. It's 1 in 3 chance that Jesus existed, which is still a respectably high chance. 1 in 3 is not like an outrageously low probability, but it does mean like more likely he didn't, and that's what freaks people out. People don't like that conclusion. But no, I just looked at the evidence, fair and balanced in that regard. And in that book, I only compare atheist hypotheses. I only look at the mundane, ordinary, secular theory of Jesus as a historical person, and the best mythicist thesis, which is Doherty's thesis, stripped away from some of the things I thought were excessive in his thesis. And so there are really only 2 atheist views in the book, and they're both atheist views. The historical Jesus as the ordinary sage who got deified after his death, and the mythicist thesis. So I'm biased towards both views, arguably. So there isn't any sense that you could say that I'm biased in favor of finding that Jesus didn't exist. That's just what I found.
Have you ever done any debates with Bart Ehrman on the topic? I'm curious. Well, what are your thoughts there? Because I saw him and Richard Price were taking.
We can make that happen. We can make it happen.
Price. I have a review of the Robert Price Bart Ehrman debate on my blog for people who are interested in that. No, he won't. He's absolutely refused to debate me. People have offered him I think something like somewhere between $5,000 and $10,000. They offered him to debate me, and he still refused.
Oh, but he hasn't talked to me yet. I have a way with people.
No, a lot of people have tried. Trust me, a lot of people have tried. No, he adamantly refuses. He comes up with excuses. He comes up with excuses for not to. One of which is I use words like "that sucks," but he thinks I'm too mean.
Really? No, that's his biggest criticism.
It's representative of his overall thesis, which is that he thinks I'm too mean. So he thinks I'll be.
You should use words like poopy instead.
No, that would be even worse, because that would be childish, right? We can't have childish things.
Poopy.
You're big poopy
head.
Debate.
Bart Ehrman, I think your theories are poopy, and I'm going to explain why.
So the 1/3 analysis you came up with, is that what you used for the Bayesian approach?
Yeah, in on the historicity of Jesus, I do a simple odds form of Bayes' theorem, and I work out a lower bound and an upper bound on margins of error. So my margin of error is somewhere between 1 in 12,000 and 1 in 3. So in responsible scientific reporting, you would say, well, my result is 1 in 3. I think it might actually be closer to 1 in 12,000, but I think the evidence is ambiguous enough that I can't really assert that with certainty. What I can say with certainty is that it's definitely no higher than 1 in 3, given the evidence that we have.
And like you said, though, if there was some person that went by the name of Jesus or represented any of that, to you at least, it doesn't change the validity or if it's divinity whatsoever. It doesn't. You would ever say, okay, Jesus existed, therefore he was the Son of God. It wouldn't follow to you that way, right?
And in on the historicity of Jesus, I don't even consider the religious hypothesis that he was God, or the conservative fundamentalist view that the Gospels are 100% literally true. No, I only take the sort of minimal historical Jesus as understood by mainstream secular scholars as the viable competing hypothesis. I don't even consider the religious hypothesis at all. We're only talking about mundane, ordinary, non-supernatural Jesus, no matter which one we're looking at.
Gotcha. Go ahead, Thomas.
If you could sum up, and I know that this is difficult because it's 6 years of research and an entire thick book, but if you could kind of sum up
three books actually, but yes.
Your entire life work in 30 seconds. Go.
But if you could kind of sum up if someone approaches you at a bar and you have just kind of a quick 5 minutes to give them a rundown as to why you don't believe that there was a historical Jesus, or why you think that there's reason to doubt, what are your biggest arguments in a nutshell?
Well, basically, there's no contemporary attestation. So all the stuff that's outside the Bible, it's only references the Gospels as sources, or someone who's citing the Gospels as source for material, or we can't establish that they have any other sources but the Gospels.
No contemporary attestation, or no contemporary secular attestation?
Oh, no secular attestation. Actually, no attestation at all as to being a historical person. We have no contemporary who was alive when he was alive saying that Jesus existed in any sense at all. Our first literature that mentions Jesus in any sense are the letters of Paul in the 50s AD. So already we're talking 20 years after the fact. And the letters of Paul, this is the other thing, is the letters of Paul talk really weirdly about Jesus. It only appears to Paul, it looks like he only knows about an outer space Jesus. He never references a Jesus who had a ministry on earth. He never mentions him picking disciples while alive. He never mentions any of this stuff. It sounds like he's talking about a revelatory being whose saga they discovered hidden in Scripture. This was some sort of cosmic event. His crucifixion and burial and stuff was undergone in some sort of supernatural realm, not in a historical sense. At least there's no clear statement in Paul that there's anything historical about Jesus. He thought Jesus was historical in the same sense he thought Satan was historical, right? But we agree that there was no Satan, there was no actual historical war of angels in heaven, even though, Paul would have believed there was some historical period in which there was a war in heaven between angels. This is the whole crucifixion and atoning crucifixion and resurrection of Jesus for Paul appears to be a cosmic event very similar to Satan's rebellion, right? So when you look at Paul, it looks really weird. And the kinds of things you would expect in those letters, if Jesus was a historical person, are missing. And the kinds of things that Paul talks about and the kinds of ways he talks about Jesus really sound like it's a revelatory being. So that we don't really have evidence even there. The first time we have a clear statement of Jesus being a human being walking around on earth are the Gospels. And the Gospels, we're already talking 20, 30 years after Paul, before the first Gospels are written, so far as we can tell. And they're written after, conveniently, about the time everyone would be dead. So everyone from the generation of Jesus, average lifespan from the time, and we have no evidence that there were any witnesses from the time of Jesus who were alive when the Gospels are being written. So they're being written already, we're talking 40, 50 years after the fact, and they continue to be written decades and decades after that. So we're talking a whole other 100-year span practically when you have other Gospels being written.
How can you tell something like that wasn't? I know that is it the Gospel of John that says that these accounts were handed down to us, so they admit at the very beginning that it's not a first-hand account.
Well, you're talking about Luke.
Or that's Luke, but the other three don't say anything like that. How can you tell that they're not first-hand accounts?
Well, it's really confusing on this. So let me just complete the last, the elevator speech point. Is that when you look at the Gospels, and this really wraps it up, because you look at the Gospels and you analyze them carefully by comparing them to other literature of the time, and in the right ways, and you compare it to the way literature is constructed, you compare it to the way the stories are constructed, they look like myth. They're written these are mythical events that have symbolic meaning. They're meant to convey propagandistically certain points. They're not written, they're written very literarily. They're very literarily crafted. They're not just random collections of memories. This is not oral lore. It's not written that way. So when you really analyze them, they do look like they're made up. Now, that could be true even if Jesus existed. So the fact that the Gospels are just made up stories using Jesus as a character is not an argument that Jesus didn't exist. It merely means that we can't rely on the Gospels now to assert that Jesus existed, because it's ambiguous. Are they just using Jesus as a character to tell these stories, or is there any actual historical information that's gotten into these Gospels about a real man? And what I find is that it's indeterminate. We can't, there may be historical facts about a man in there, but we can't tell. And so the Gospels end up being useless as evidence. And of course, every single one of those points
I would be shit-faced drunk by the time you got done with that, just FYI.
Yeah.
But that's okay. I don't mind that. It answered the question.
Well, every single one of those points, you could go on down a whole rabbit hole of argument. Go, what about this? Or what about this? What about this? And that's, of course, why the book is so long, because I'm dealing with every possible thing that you could say. Let's look at everything. Let's look at everything. And so we do, and I do in the book. And so that's that thing. Now, your question about, it was about Luke's, Luke has a preface in there which really reads like a fake preface. And I'll tell you why it reads like a fake preface. It mimics the structure of real prefaces in ancient histories, except lacks all the things that you would expect in a real history, which are specific details. So, for example, usually a historian in his preface states who he is and why you should believe anything he's writing. He'll tell you who his sources are. How did he gather the information that's in this book? Where did he get it from? And how did he use it? How did he choose between conflicting accounts? We have this in Arrian, for example. Arrian's a historian of Alexander the Great. Arrian wrote in the 3rd century AD, so about 500 years after Alexander the Great. But Arrian says, look, I have, and I'm using as my sources, the books written by Alexander's generals and his court historian. These are eyewitnesses who actually traveled with them. We've got their books. I'm using them. And when they don't disagree, I'll just repeat the narrative, and when they disagree, I'll mention that they disagree and tell you what I think about the different options. And so, but he names them. He tells you his source. He tells you who he is. So Luke conspicuously omits any references to. He says, people have written books before me. I was like, well, wait a minute, who? Who and how? Why are we supposed to believe them? And he just says and what they wrote essentially is what was handed on by the eyewitnesses. And I was like, how do you know that? It's like, so there's a lot of detail. And who are you, by the way? He doesn't even introduce himself. Like, why do we should even believe anything you're saying? Who are you? Luke doesn't say. So the preface looks very fake. It's designed to look like history, to feel like history, which really tells you that this is propaganda. Like, he's trying to sell this as a thing, but really he doesn't really have any data to give you about his sources and stuff. And yet we know who his sources are because he quotes them verbatim. He uses the material verbatim, and that's Matthew and Mark, right? So, and historians will debate whether it's Matthew or this other source that Matthew also copied. I think it's Matthew. I think all it is, it's Matthew and Mark.
The Q.
And he doesn't. Yeah. And Luke doesn't tell you why he chooses between Matthew and Mark when he does. He doesn't tell you which parts are coming from which authors or why. And he doesn't tell you why he changes their stuff. He changes things that he uses from them. So, and that's also how we know it's not oral lore. Like, clearly Luke is using verbatim literary sources. He's not using oral sources. He's using literary sources, and he's changing them up in the way he wants to change them up. He doesn't like Mark. He doesn't like Matthew. He's creating a better version of the story that'll serve his purposes better. And that's the kind of example of what I mean. When you look at the final analysis, it really falls apart. There's one other example. There's John. Now, there are some mentions in the end of John where he says that they used some other book written by some guy who was an eyewitness. But that part appears to have been added later. The problem with the Gospel of John is it's undergone multiple redactions by multiple authors over time. So the version we have is not the original version, and we don't know what material comes from the earliest parts and which material comes from later. Moreover, the guy that they say they got this from is a fictional character that he invented that you can tell. And I analyzed this and on the Historicity of Jesus. You can see it's a made-up character. So the source is a made-up source. So that's full-on propaganda. Like, when you're just outright making up a source and saying, yeah, this is my source. This guy was there. Trust me. Now you know you're being bullshitted, right? So it's when you look at the Gospels like this and you really look at them, you start to realize that these are not reliable documents at all. We can't base historicity on them. I was there.
And so let me quickly ask, what is his motive for doing that? I mean, why did he try to write this narrative, if that's the case?
Which one?
Peter,
John or Luke? Because it's different, right? Luke had the preface. John's the one who invented a witness. And the witness was evidently named at some point, but the names got washed out of the edits of the book. It was probably, I argue in the book, it was probably Lazarus originally is the witness he's claiming. The resurrected Lazarus he's claiming is the witness who wrote down this source that they used. But for that, I'm not the first to propose this. This is in the peer-reviewed literature. I've got several scholars. This is a thing that's been discovered over and over again without people noticing because they didn't check the literature before them to realize someone else noticed this before me. No, I cite all of the scholarship on that in my book on the Historicity of Jesus. Well, no, what they're doing, if you look at, so they want to teach the gospel, and they want to give missionaries a context and a set of stories to tell in order to answer things that missionaries are going to run into. And so the missionaries will use these books to sell their religion and say, like, and this is what Jesus did, and this is what happened, and this is what he said. And then someone will say, but it wasn't he just crazy? And he said, you know what? Some people came up to Jesus one time and said he was crazy, and this is what he said. And they have a whole story written out. And it's like, well, what does family say? And I was like, well, you know what? Actually, Jesus said he renounced his family. He says the true family is this fictive kinship. When you join Christianity, you become our brothers and sisters and the brothers and sisters of Jesus. You join this fictive family. And let me tell you a story about that. So it's like the stories are all meant to sell the gospel. And they're all meant to explain things. Some of the stories explain why God destroyed the Jewish temple, even though this is supposed to be God's true religion, right? So there's various things in there. And there's a lot of other stories that are used to rhetorical effect, like how the disciples abandoned him and then came back. It's the whole preacher's, you hear many a preacher talk about how he was a reprobate and a sinner and an atheist, and then he saw God, and this is supposed to convince you more that what he's telling you is true. And so you have the Gospels tell stories about the disciples being wayward and Jesus, upbraiding them and correcting them and stuff. It's very
they saw the light.
Yeah, it's very similar kind of rhetorical function of this.
Okay,
that's one function of these. And another is like people were going around using Homer this way. They would tell stories from Homer to illustrate some point they wanted to make. Like, well, here's some moral value I want to promote or some idea I want to promote. And they'll relate a story from Homer and say, yeah, it's just like that. But Homer was very sinful and immoral from the perspective of the Christians. That literature could not be used for that purpose because there's all kinds of awful things going on there. They couldn't endorse, much less paganism, right? So they can't have that. And so it does look like the Gospels are revamps of Homer. They're basically the Christian version of Homer to tell these stories. And so you have a very similar story in Mark of Jesus who spends most of his time on a lake for some reason, even though it's a landlocked, tiny little lake in the whole region of Galilee. He spends a lot of time at sea with a bunch of bumbling crewmen that always fuck up, and he has to upbraid them for it. And that's exactly the Odyssey, right? That's Odysseus is constantly on the water, surrounded by bumbling crewmen who always fuck up, and he has to upbraid them and fix their problems and stuff. So it's the same kind of story, but they do this to have that entertaining value and to have that sort of message, but then also to sell their values rather than the Homeric values. They want to replace those evil Homeric values with good Christian values by putting their message in there. Now, each Christian sect disagreed on what that message should be. So you have Mark comes along and he's writing this Gentile-friendly book. He's like, you don't have to follow Jewish dietary laws anymore. It has Jesus say this and things like that. And Matthew was written by a Jewish Christian community. They were still Torah observant. They did not like Mark saying this. They didn't like Mark's un-Jewish Jesus at all. And he wasn't completely un-Jewish, but he was fairly too Gentile for them. And so they made a really Jewish Jesus. And so they added these huge speeches, putting Jesus, he does 5 big speeches in the Gospel of Matthew, which correspond to the 5 great books of the Torah. And they depict him as Moses, complete with the whole nativity narrative, which is just a total ripoff of the Moses story. And so they make Jesus come out look like the new Moses, and he's teaching things like, no, not one jot or tittle of the law has been abolished. You must obey everything. And so they're creating a Jewish Jesus. They're creating a better gospel to defeat Mark's gospel. So this is a crappy manual. We're going to make one, and we're going to claim ours as the original one, because it's clear that whoever wrote Matthew is not acknowledging Mark as a source. They're trying to pass off their book as the real one and Mark's as the fake one. And so that's what they do. So Matthew's arguing against Mark, and then Luke comes along, and Luke wants to unify the two churches. He wants the Jewish Christians and the Gentile Christians to get along, even though secretly he thinks the Gentile Christians have got it right. But nonetheless, he wants them to get along, and so he writes a completely different narrative. He doesn't like Matthew's books; it's too anti-Gentile, and he doesn't like Mark's books; it's too anti-Jewish. So, and it's not anti-Jewish, but it's like not Jewish enough, right, for the Jewish Christians' tastes. And so Luke comes along and tries to create this narrative that sells it as like this unified church all the way along. You can both get along. You can both coexist. It's fine. We've always been law-abiding citizens. This is great. So even the Romans should like us. There's no reason why we should be persecuted by either the Jews or the Romans, and so on. So he creates this other gospel to create a different message that, try to beat to best and better Mark and Matthew. And then John comes along and he says, fuck all you guys. I hate all your shit. And he writes a completely different gospel to sell his message, which is completely different. And he has the angry, Jesus is freaking God in your face, Jesus, right? So he's got a completely different message that he wants to sell. So he rewrites the gospel to sell his own message. And so you look, and I talk about what the messages are and how they differ on the Historicity of Jesus. But all these gospels were written to argue against each other. And they're just 4. They're like, we know there are over 40 gospels written in this period between about 70 AD and maybe about 200 AD. And in that span of about 130 years, at least 40 titles got composed. And we only have
the earliest, or just the ones that ended up in
Well, that's debated, right? I assume they're the earliest. I don't really know. We actually don't know. And we actually don't have most of these gospels. We just know them by name. And some of them are weird. Some of them don't follow the narrative format of the gospels we have in the canon. But what happened is someone tried to unify these churches against what they perceived as heretics, meaning Marcion mostly. So what happened is in about 140 AD, Marcion came along. This is a Christian missionary who changed up the message, or maybe he didn't change up the message. Maybe his was more authentic to the original, and it doesn't matter. But what he did is he's the first one to create a canon. He collected a collection of books and sold it as, this is the new Christian canon. And he was the first one to do this. By the way, this canon does not exist. It did not survive. It was destroyed. And that was the first Christian Bible. It's gone. So someone wrote an anti-Marcionite Bible. They wrote their own Bible to support their side in the political war to take over the church. And it was against him. And that's the Bible we have. We have the anti-original Christian Bible. So we have
What's that one called?
Well, it's just the Bible. But
Okay,
The
but-
New Testament
well,
is what it is called today. But
Well, I'm curious how far back, because I know you were saying, we'll have like, what is it? Is it like P52 or something, or like these old tiny little papyrus fragments from
Yeah.
that, and that's like the earliest stuff that we have
Mhm.
from from any gospel. But even
Yeah.
those, like, that's not a complete gospel. So when
No.
I was kind of Googling around trying to find out what is the earliest actual Bible that we have, I kind of had a hard time of it. Like the earliest complete one, not a copy of
right.
whatever.
And so what you're asking for is the earliest one to survive, not the earliest one
Yes.
to have been built. Yeah, that's so those are two different things. There's the Bible was probably constructed. The New Testament was probably constructed in the form that we know it in the mid first century AD. I talk about this on the Historicity of Jesus, but I also have it on my blog. There are 3 things about the New Testament that you should know. And you can go to my blog and look for 3 things New Testament, and you'll find my blog article about it. One of them is David Trobish, who incidentally, he's the secular scholar now, who's been appointed to curate the Green Bible Museum, the Hobby Lobby Fundamentalist Bible Museum in DC that just opened recently. He's the curator of that museum, and yet he's written a lot of really interesting theories that sort of don't agree with what fundamentalist Christians want to have been said. But he presented evidence that the Bible that we have, the New Testament that we have, stems from a single edition that was put together to combat Marcion in the mid-1st century. I'm sorry, mid-2nd century, not mid-1st century, mid-2nd century. So we're talking like 150s to 180s AD, somewhere in there. And all the scraps we have that come from books in that appear to come from that edition or versions of that edition. And we have like scraps that it might be like a few words or a few sentences or a few paragraphs at most. You get like almost whole books, individual pieces of books and stuff like that in the 3rd century. But the first complete Bible, or mostly complete, they're all damaged. So none of them are like completely complete. But the earliest complete Bible that we have in physical form would be Codex Sinaiticus, which would have been written somewhere between, or would have been transcribed somewhere between 300 and 350 AD. It's somewhere in there. And we have I think there's a few others. Codex Vaticanus is maybe just shortly later date than that. But once we get to the 4th century, we have 2 or 3 complete Bibles, more or less complete Bibles. And then 5th century, we have a few more, and 6th century, a few more. But yeah, the earliest one.
They might have like one gospel that's not in another that's, or did they kind of agree on
out of
it?
order? No, they pretty much agree on everything. Some of them include books that aren't in ours, but they all pretty much include all the books that we have in ours. Some have Hermas or the Letter to Barnabas, and some other weird books like that. And they also have different things, somewhat different things in the Old Testament too, because some of these Bibles come with an Old Testament. The Christian chosen, by the way, Christian selection of Old Testament books. Yeah.
One last question, and then I have to run. I have Valentine's Day plans.
Yeah.
But so those are the earliest full Bible, if you will, compilations that we have that are somewhat damaged. But what's the earliest complete gospel? Just standalone gospel. Like here's the Gospel of John, or here's the Gospel of Luke. Do you know what the earliest?
Well, again, the earliest one you would pick would be, I think we have one in the 3rd century. I can't remember which gospel, but it's damaged as well. So we don't really have a complete one, but nearly like a large amount of the book. I think 3rd century, definitely no earlier than 3rd century. We have nothing complete before the 3rd century.
Do you know what the name for that one is, or?
No, not off the top of my head. Okay. I'd have to check, especially since things keep getting redated. So I don't. I don't know.
Well,
I don't know how complete they are too.
They're finding new stuff, and But hey, thank you.
Anyway. Oh yeah, sure.
Thank you for answering my questions. I've been enjoying. You put out you collaborated on an app, the Christus app.
That's right. Yes. CHRESTUS. It's available for Android and iOS. Right now, it's just a rough launch.
Walks you through like some of the questions about historicity and.
Yeah, it's got a chronology. It's got a glossary, and it's got an argument tree that's built out. It's a rough launch right now. We're going to do some updates. It's going to get better and better. The ultimate goal is, we're going to have it contain every argument for and against the historicity of Jesus. So every piece of evidence, every argument, everything in there in a hierarchy, so that you can go quickly find it. So you can use this app if you're arguing with someone or if you're just curious about it. But also it has a Bayesian calculator in it, which you can actually use for anything, not just this, but where you can actually put in pieces of evidence and put in estimates of your own, like odds, basically estimates of prior odds, estimates of evidential odds for each piece of evidence. And any piece of evidence you want, you can enter it and delete it or whatever, and then the calculator will do the math for you. And it actually walks you through and explains to you how to do that. So that's a really useful tool just in and of itself. Which you can actually use for anything because it's generic. Doesn't actually mention Jesus in it. You can actually put any evidence in it. So you can use the Bayesian calculator for any argument you ever get in. So it's useful for that as well. But yeah, that app is available now, and it's going to keep getting better.
Richard,
Fantastic.
you use the M word.
Which
Math.
we were talking about this before the show a little bit. Yeah.
All right. I got to run, but hey, thank you so much, guys, for having me. It was a pleasure, Richard. Happy birthday, Steve, and thanks for letting me monopolize the first little bit.
Hi and bye, Thomas, by the way.
Good seeing you again.
And say hi to Amanda for me.
Will do. Happy Valentine's Day, everybody.
Likewise, too. I might as well bring her in right now. We're gonna try to get to everybody. I know, a lot of people are in here. People in the live feed want to do Q&A. I get that. But you remember Heretic Woman, obviously.
Yes.
I know you do.
Of course. Hi.
So, sorry, I'm a little late to the party today.
got here before my co-host. So hey.
Yes, I was gonna say I don't feel so bad when the co-host shows up after I do. So.
No, I knew that Kyle would be a little late. I'll bring Kyle in a second. But Heretic, what do you got to add to this so far? This has actually been really fascinating. I gotta admit, I am not hip on this stuff. I feel like I'm the odd man out because I'm just.
It's all right. It's all right.
Topic, but I'm finding it to be fascinating. So.
I have to apologize. I'm still kind of waking up a little bit. I'm shaking the cobwebs out here, but it's all right. But yeah, the Christus App.
I'm the same, Heretic.
Okay.
I thank you. No, the app is really awesome, and I have to plug a friend of mine locally here who helped Richard develop it. Yeah, my friend Lee Shields. He's from CFI Toronto, and he worked his ass off with this and helped Richard get it going, and it's really a great little piece of technology, I gotta say, because there's been a number of times where the topic has come up for me in I debate on Facebook all the time, and it's come up and people are like, well, how could you possibly think there might not be a Jesus? And then you're like, oh shit, I've got to remember where was that, or Josephus, and they're like, what do you mean Josephus? And it's so nice to have a little thing where I could pop in, pull out the exact piece that somebody's being critical about, and go, boom, there's your evidence.
Yeah.
Well, I've been using it since I saw him on your show, Heretic Woman.
Yeah.
And,
awesome.
Right. It's the first time.
I assume for iPhone. I mean, just strictly for iPhone, or is this something that'll be on the web?
No, I have
Android, and iPhone and iPad. iPad, iPhone, Android.
I have it on Android myself, so.
Well, you're going to have to get me that then. I will put that in the video description, and I will download it myself and check it out.
Yeah, because it's on Google Play.
I want to see this myself as well.
We all want
anything else I can argue with it.
They're everywhere.
It's going to improve. We've got a new platform for writing the code for it. That'll give it better features, and we're going to build it out more. It's going to be better organized. So it's going to keep improving, and the updates are free. So once you're in, you can already enjoy using it, and then it'll just get better and better.
Richard, can you give the name of the app one more time, because I didn't quite catch it.
It's Christus.
I got a question about it.
Chrestus. It's a silly acronym that we came up with, but you do Christus, you'll find it. There isn't anything else that has that name in the apps.
Is it designed so that an atheist can use it, or a Christian who objects to the opinions of it? Like, say I'm a Christian and I believe
in it, but yes.
Well,
yes,
sure, but let's say that I'm a Christian and I download it and I want to ask the Christus app questions and be like, all right, so I have this objection, and then the Christian can then see what the evidence is to their claims, or is that how it would work, or would it work that way?
No, exactly. Okay. Like, for example, you say, well, what about this verse in Paul? Doesn't that prove that Jesus existed? Well, we have a section in there with all the verses of Paul in order, and you just find the verse that you're looking for, click it, and it'll have the whole thing on it.
Oh, that's excellent. Great.
Yeah, that sounds like something I like to check out and play with to kind of see. I like those types of things where they have point counterpoint. and if it's done fairly and honestly and some neutrality, obviously, then I think it's helpful for everybody.
Yeah, the goal is to accurately represent all the criticisms and all the arguments on the other side, and then obviously accurately represent our side on it. But that is definitely the goal. And in fact, if anything you think could be worded better, stated better, if something's left out, definitely let us know. I mean, I know there's some things left out now because there's things I've already got ready to go in an update that I'm working on. But it doesn't hurt. Any advice you have, like wait, what, you should have this in there, you should have that in there, or this could be worded better. And here, those
Steve,
kinds of
can
things.
you see that?
The live chat is putting forward some stuff right now. They say that they're interested in having like a free version or a trial version or limited version of some kind. My suggestion is to have, you can download it for free, at which point when you press it, it just says Jesus wasn't real and then does like a screeching sound.
Steve, can you see that?
Yes, I screen shared it. Thank you.
Okay, no problem. There we go.
We consider the
I want to get to
trial
Ocean.
version. It was just really difficult to implement. We're a really shoestring budget, and apps are extraordinarily expensive to design. The back end machinery for building apps is needlessly vastly complicated. Like, it's way more complicated than it needs to be. So it actually ended up being, and also the monetary end too. Like, how do you like, to go with Apple, you have to have like the correct kind of bank account. It's like all kinds of things are really complicated. So. And you can't, certain things you can't change, like you can't change the pricing once you've picked it. It's like, it's a mess. It's really hard to work with apps. Android is way much easier to work with than iPhone, but than Apple, I mean. But yes, we made the decision that it's too expensive and too complicated to do the multi-stage version, and so we didn't. And so what our hope is eventually, once I get a couple updates done, or at least one update done, we'll do like I'll do a show, someone's show, and we'll just like show the app on screen and I'll just walk it through. And so you can actually see a big walkthrough, and then you get kind of like a free idea of like, oh yeah, shit, I want that app. So look for, so if you're still not sure, then you can look for that in future. Keep your eye on my Twitter feed or my Facebook feed for when we come out with something like that. We might have like a little demo video that like shows you how this works and what's in it and stuff like that. Yeah. That's what we're going to do. And we're going to have that done by the end of the year. The end of 2018. It's
because you guys only came out with this in September, so it's very, very new.
Yeah, and
exactly. I know Lee did a shit ton of work beforehand.
He really did.
There's a shit ton of work more to do. So
yeah.
I know there was a criticism in the chat by somebody whom I think you could probably guess, who was saying, well, it should be free because then he's not in it for the money. I'm like, do you have any fucking clue how much work goes into that? Like,
it's not just the labor. I mean, the labor, yes, but no, actual money. So because we had to hire a coder. We aren't coders.
Absolutely.
So we're actually going to be in the red on this. We're not going to make a profit. So your money is actually just going to recover our losses.
And I gotta say, I think Lee wouldn't mind me speaking from in this, is that it was really a labor of love for him. Like, he poured his heart and soul into it because he believed in the app and that it was something that needed.
And he funded it. Yeah. So it's definitely. I mean, I highly encourage people to buy it just to reward him.
Yes. So for that person who's criticizing, Lee is the one who really wanted this, and he knew that Richard was the guy for the job. It's not Richard trying to make money. My friend Lee who thought that this needed to be out there. So there you go.
I mean, and I don't want to nix on artists who artists really do you shouldn't criticize artists for monetizing their work. They do have to eat. So they have to make rent and stuff. It's just people have this idea that you're rolling in the dough when you have
and this angle that if you put out a viewpoint that's contrary to theirs and people want to support you in your research in that idea, that somehow that makes your research wrong, that's bullshit. So
And by the way, real quick, I know obviously Heretics reading the live chat. We're approaching fast approaching 100 people watching.
Wow, cool.
So I don't know if Richard is watching, if he wants to address anything in the live chat. We will get to some questions. One of the people that have been looking at the live chat. I don't think you've been looking at the group chat either. I've been posting in that as well.
I see.
But the person that we had talked about the other day to set you up with a conversation She's in the live chat if you want to address that eventually. But let me get to some other people real quick. Oh, you have to go to the video description. Let me give it to you. How about that? And then while I'm doing that, Reed, why don't you go next real quick? And then I really want to get to Ocean and Kyle here coming up.
Did you want to just port some questions in? Or like, how I don't know how you want to...
I know he's been patiently waiting. Reed, did you want to ask Richard a question? And then, we'll get to everybody. I want to make sure everybody has a little bit of time. And then we'll do a little Q&A from the live feed.
Sure. Just to finish up on Christus, Richard, do you get the comments that are done for the reviews in the Apple App Store?
Eventually, not right away. Lee does. Lee is the one who will be seeing those things. I mean, eventually I will, if there's things in there that I can act on.
Okay, because I did write one for you. I think it's the first one there.
Okay.
And what I'm asking is are you going to eventually link this to, for example, blog posts that you've done? Or for people who want to go a little deeper, this is a great, it's a 10,000 foot overview.
But, it already does in some places, but it does. There are a lot more places where we could link blog posts through. But there are several places where you can click right into the web, where it says, well, here's a blog article about this, and you go right in. We're definitely going to build that out even more just over time as things go. Especially, I'm going to keep writing blogs, so there'll be more to put in there. Definitely that's a feeture we're going to build out more than we already have. And there is some in there already.
And also a tablet version. Because now, the iPad version of the app is just the iPhone version big.
That's not a priority, unfortunately. So it'll keep looking like the tall man. It'll still look the same way for a while. It's like Tinder in that respect, I guess. It's like it never goes back to landscape.
Am I the only person that's ever tried Tinder? I feel so like either old or outdated. I'm not sure.
That's okay, Steve. I've never looked at it either.
It's a dating thing, right? No, here's how it used to be in my day, because I think I'm older than all of you combined. Maybe Reed might have me, I think.
Combined? I don't know.
Well, it's my birthday. Anybody know how old I am, by the way? Anybody know? Anybody care?
It's his birthday today. Say happy birthday to Steve.
Yes. I'm 1 year closer to death. Thank you very much for pointing that out.
Happy birthday, Steve. I hate you.
But I am 48. Is anybody older than me? Reed, are you older?
Oh, yeah. I told you I have a guitar that I got new that's older.
Oh, you did? Yeah. But you don't look, you see, you don't look older than me. I look older than you. Yeah, that's true. Good point. Fair enough. We were, by the way,
I am 48 as well, so I am the same age.
Okay, well, let's figure this out. Mine's February 14th, and yours is before or after that?
December 1st is my birthday.
Oh, so you're my senior. Damn it. Okay.
Just a little.
Yeah.
All right, well, we're going to call you the old man of the group then. All right, fair enough.
So anyway, I have several things I wrote down, but if I can just pick up on one.
About that.
Think about what?
Wait, what? So you said that you were 48. Someone else said they were also 48, and you were trying to figure out who was older, and it's your birthday today.
His birthday could have been
that's right.
I'm not that stupid.
Unless my birthday was literally today. Yes.
Now this was January 1st. No.
It's the math.
That's new math. It's Common Core.
Anyway, Richard, like I said, I have a bunch of things that I could cover, but let me just focus on one, and that is you hear a lot of pushback from people who say that, well, there's not enough historical evidence for this one or for that one or for whatever.
Yeah.
And and so you've got this category problem with the rank Raglan hero listing of attributes, etc. Can you touch on that for everybody so that they can understand why it is that we distinguish this from other historical characters?
Right. Let's start from like there's always some new character someone will throw out and say, well, what about Alexander the Great? Or what about we have more evidence for Jesus than Alexander the Great? It's like we really don't, not even close. But yeah, there's a whole list. There's Alexander the Great, Julius Caesar, Spartacus, Pontius Pilate, Herod Agrippa. There've been a bunch of names thrown out. I've written on all of them. So I have a blog post called well, what about Spartacus? I think is the title. I can't remember, but it's my blog article about Spartacus. People can find it at richardcarrier.info. Go there, just search my blog for Spartacus, and you'll find it. But the first paragraph, I list all the others with links or book references. So you have the whole list of all. Socrates is covered on the Historicity of Jesus. He's a good comparison because Socrates, like Jesus, didn't write anything, right? So it's only his, quote unquote, disciples who did, supposedly, but you can compare and contrast the two in terms of the evidence for them. So there's two things going on. One is the evidence, and all these characters that they name, the evidence for them is already better. So it doesn't even matter what category they're in, right? So it's already like the evidence is usually way better. Or is certainly better. But then there's this other issue, like there are tons of like little minor characters in history that we don't have great evidence for, and like we don't doubt their existence. So why should we doubt Jesus? And so that's where the valid analogy or the valid argument comes from. It's like, well, yeah, what do you do about that? No one ever seems to come up with any examples. So I'm amused. They always name someone as like, why did you name Spartacus? The attestation is way better. Like you could have named like a dozen other people that would be a better argument than this. No. So there, the issue is what reference class
the comparison to Ragnar Lodbrok.
Yeah, it was.
We're talking about that in the side chat. Ragnar Lodbrok is probably a better example than Spartacus or any other like ancient Greek or Odysseus or Achilles might also be a good example.
No, they're not really, but
Achilles is not.
I mean, no, they're good in terms of like there's no evidence they existed. That's absolutely true.
Right, but we do have like a story referencing them.
Yeah, but they're everybody agrees they probably didn't exist. So those are we want what we want or what they want, what the critics want.
Sure.
Is someone from whom we have the same kind of evidence we have for Jesus, the same quality and degree of evidence, but we're certain they existed. Now, there actually isn't anyone in that category, but you could at least find people in that category for whom we're like, we don't doubt them. Like we say like, well, we're not certain they existed, but yeah, probably they did. And you can name like minor administrative functionaries mentioned in Josephus who were working under Herod the Great. It's like you could probably find someone who fits this category. And it's like, well, we don't really doubt they existed.
Okay, I see what you're saying.
There's no evidence really, no good evidence for them, but there's enough evidence to actually balance of odds. We'll say this. Now, the reason is because people belong to different reference classes. So when you have someone who is a worshipped savior deity, especially if they're like a resurrected god, like we have all these categories of people where almost everyone in the set doesn't exist. Like resurrected savior heroes, they just like most of those we all agree they don't exist. Heroes who go on adventures, like we have Hercules and these others. Most of them don't exist. But then you have these other classes. You have like administrative functionaries in a military history. Like they usually existed. And then you have people who were philosophers who interacted with this other philosopher. They probably existed. So there are different categories of people where when you look at that set of people, usually they either existed or they didn't exist. So there's some tendency. Some cases it might be 50-50, but usually it's a tendency. And when you look at people who are in the reference classes to which Jesus belongs, most of those classes are very myth heavy. Like most of the members or all of them are mythical. They're not historical. There are a few classes Jesus belongs to that appear to be historical, history heavy. One of which is like messianic pretenders, Jewish messianic pretenders. You could make a little list of criteria and say Jesus fits this category. There are tons of those. Well, at least we can name maybe 5 or 6 of them.
The live chat is screaming Socrates.
Okay, yeah, but no, we have lots of good evidence for Socrates. But he's a good example of he's not a worshipped savior deity. He didn't like murder thousands of pigs by casting spirits into them. Like he didn't do like magical things. But he's not into these classes of people.
I would say that the bar is higher for somebody like Jesus because millions of people think that you should devote your entire life to following everything that this guy did, whereas nobody cares what Pontius Pilate did beyond the Jesus story, right? Nobody's saying follow Pilate and do every, it's a bigger standard.
Here's what they would say.
He might have been someone who existed where there's a lot of legendary stories about him.
Yeah, exactly. Here's what a smart critic would say. A smart critic would say, well, we have a lot of these gurus like this, right? That people say exactly that about, right? That are actually historical. We even have Haile Selassie, who didn't say any of the damn shit that the Rastafarians say he said, and yet they will follow him as their great leader and their Messiah, and he's telling them, I'm not your freaking Messiah. But no, they don't listen to him, and they invent their own gospels with his miracle stories about Rastafari and stuff. And It's like, so yeah, we have examples of historical people about whom that's the case. And you can look at like religious founders. So people say like, what about founders of religions? They usually existed, right? I was like, well, it depends on what you mean. Do you mean like a certain divine founder? Like, because you have like, really the founder of Mormonism is Moroni, who's an angel, who's not a historical person. Really the founder of Islam is the angel Gabriel, and he's not a historical person. It's their messengers are the actual historical founders. Muhammad is the messenger of Gabriel. He received revelations of Gabriel and is the messenger of Gabriel. Joseph Smith claimed to receive the messages of Moroni and was the messenger. So the messengers are the founders. When you look at those models, there are lots of examples of non-existent founders. So the Luddite movement has a mythical founder. The John Frum movement, the cargo cults, Tom Yankee movement. These are all there's founders that didn't actually exist. So we have both examples, right? And here's the problem: is like when you look at these sets, you look at all these sets, and you can see Jesus belongs to tons of sets that are myth heavy. In fact, he belongs to more sets that are myth heavy than he belongs to sets that are history heavy. But the sets are all fairly small. Like they might have like 2, 3, 4, maybe at most 6 members. But there is one set that he belongs to that has a lot of members. In fact, it's the set that has the most members of any set that Jesus belongs to, and that's the rank Raglan hero class. It's a particular type of mythical hero. But as far as we know, all members of which don't exist. They did not exist. I actually allow for margin of error that maybe some of them did, but we actually have no evidence that any of them existed. And there's 15 of them. So is it 14 or 15? Which is a lot. Actually, for ancient history, this is a lot. This is like, for your standard quantitative scientist is like, that's a shitty data set. I was like, yeah, welcome to history. Thank you. But yes, but that's a lot.
I totally agree with you there.
But the point being is we have no other set.
I don't believe it. Well, history.
We have no other set that has that many members that we can actually have a really strong statistical result where it's all members are non-existent. And so that actually becomes a proxy. And I think people mistake this. People think that I'm saying that because Jesus is a rank Raglan hero, therefore he didn't exist, which is not my argument at all. My argument is that any hero who gets as mythologized as a rank Raglan hero, and so anyone who's in the rank Raglan set tends to not have existed, actually, in a way that like, military generals who fought Rome actually tend to have existed in that set of categories. So the rank Raglan set is good. It's usable only because it has so many members that didn't exist. And so that's what makes it useful. And it's really only a proxy for a more broader concept, which is how mythologized was Jesus. And it shows that Jesus was hugely mythologized way more rapidly than any other historical person we know, with maybe the exception of, if you're talking about people for whom we don't have any contemporary contrary evidence, like Haile Selassie, highly mythologized, not quite as much as Jesus, but we have tons of contemporary documentation where we can get at the real Haile Selassie. Like the legendary Haile Selassie is a follow-up. It was created after all the documentation for the mundane Haile Selassie, but we don't have that for Jesus. And what we're looking for is like, well, where's the mundane Jesus before he gets wildly mythologized? Where is the regular Jesus? Where's the ordinary memoir of someone who met Jesus and said, this guy was great? The closest thing we have are the letters of Paul. And so that's where we would expect to find the mundane Jesus. And the weird thing is we don't. And so that's where things start to fall apart.
Let me ask you a quick, Richard, before I turn over to Kyle here in a second. In regards to Heretic's question, I agree and I disagree with what she said. And I agree with her that things have obviously a standard of evidence, a burden of evidence for their existence. I get that. Now, if you're just talking about Jesus as a man, I don't see that being any different bar than any other person. Now, if you're talking about the evidence for his divinity, then yes, that requires quite a bit of evidence to support that. But I mean, I do understand people go on faith, but I'm just saying, just if he existed, would there really be any difference about how you go about approaching it, either Bayesian like or evidential like, as far as him existing in some form from which the narrative came from, as opposed to any other historical figure?
But notice you're actually assuming Jesus exists in some sort of historical report where he's just an ordinarily reported person. That's the problem, is that he's not. He's more like Achilles or Hercules or Osiris or Romulus or all these other guys who were reported to be historical human people at some point in their existence. And yet we don't believe they existed. And they didn't, probably. I mean, in some cases we can confirm for sure they didn't. Like Osiris, definitely, there was never an Osiris. So that's that's the thing that we're looking at, is that we see no historical person, then suddenly, bam, massively mythologized superhero. And so the question is like, well, does that usually happen to a historical person? And the answer is usually no. So when you see that happen, that's usually a big red flag for it doesn't exist. And so what you need now you're starting the bar is, okay, we're looking at probably a mythical superhero because that's what he looks like. He looks just like all these other mythical superheroes. So we need evidence to overcome that. And you could have, like, suppose the only things that survived about Alexander the Great were the Alexander romances, which basically turn him into a mythical superhero of some kind, even though not even as much as Jesus. And say you only had that, and you go, wow, this looks super mythical. Totally couldn't have been an Alexander the Great. So your prior probability, you'd say, yeah, okay, we're starting at a low probability that he existed. So let's go look at the evidence for him. And when you did that, you would find, coins, inscriptions, Babylonian death certificates. Literally, we have these things. So we've got all of this stuff. And you go, well, okay, that stuff couldn't possibly have existed if he was mythical. So that totally overwhelms the prior probability that we got to. So even though he was mythologized heavily, we've got enough evidence to be sure that he at least did exist. So and the thing is with Jesus, we don't have that. We start out with Jesus looking just like non-existent people look like. And then so we would go and need more evidence to sort of counteract that and say, like, is he one of the exceptions to the rule? Or is he just like everybody else who looks like this? And we can't find any evidence that proves he's an exception to the rule. Now, that may be because the evidence is lost. But if that's the case, then we're still stuck with not knowing. So we're stuck with like 1 in 3 chance. Like maybe he did. But given the data we have, it doesn't look likely.
Okay, I got you. So you're basically, your argument kind of stems from the approach that there's not a precursors to support it, and because of similar type mythicized type figures, the probability, because he's in that set, is less.
Yeah, there's no mundane Jesus. That's the thing. Is that there's only super Jesus.
Yeah, when I mean precursor
or revelatory Jesus. These are the only versions that exist in the record. And so. That's unusual. That's what makes him different from someone like Spartacus, where there's not like suddenly there's a super mythical Spartacus. There's just an ordinary Spartacus, and then legends grow about him.
I got to tell you, that's a great name for a band, since we were like
super
jamming.
Spartacus.
No. Mundane Jesus.
I think ordinary Spartacus.
Mundane Jesus.
Mundane Jesus and ordinary Spartacus are playing a concert.
It is a great name. Mundane. Somebody's gonna take it. Run with it. Go ahead. But
that's awesome.
So if I can real quick, let me get my podcast partner here, Mr. Kyle Curtis. Kyle, are you with us?
I am finally.
You made it. Awesome. Thank you.
I wasn't going to tell you happy birthday, Steve, until you totally called me out. So,
well, as long as you don't sing it, that's just, oh man, people singing that to me is just, okay. So, but.
Dr. Carrier, it's nice to finally meet you.
Oh yeah. Hi.
I have, I guess we saved the most difficult questions for last. Regarding your debate with the evangelical version of Mr. Rogers, William Lane Craig, what exactly did you take beforehand to achieve that level of untriggeredness? You were calm to a
he had centered himself for hours with bonsai trees. And,
that's just who I am. So I'm good at that. That's my natural state. So yeah, I know what you mean. That guy was lying his ass off so much. It was enraging. And he made so many claims. The clock ran out before I could refute them all. So I actually thought like it was a technical loss in the sense that I ran out of time. I couldn't get to all the points I wanted to make. But someone pointed out later that he ignored a lot of my arguments. So I actually need a professional debate scorer to go over that. I'm actually dating someone. One of my girlfriends used to do academic debate in college, and so she knows how to actually professionally score a debate. I keep meaning to importune her to I know it's going to be horrible, but you got to suffer through this, 2 or 3 hour long debate with like you said, the Christian, the evangelical Mr. Rogers, and professionally score it. Give me, what is the actual score on this debate?
I'll tell you what I'll do.
I'd be curious to know what it actually is. So I actually don't know right now.
What we'll do. Since we have 1,000 some odd plus people in the great debate community who like debate, I'm pretty sure that some of them know how to do that. And what I'll do is I'll make a post about that particular video, and it's asked for people to do that if they want to do it, and then kind of an average, and then just kind of send it and see what. Yeah, I'm just kind of curious
to see if you have multiple people who know how to do that. I mean, you can't just be random people.
No.
I don't even know how to score a debate professionally, but I have a rough idea of how to do point counterpoint analysis, and I did that for the Price Ehrman debate. But yeah, it'd be interesting to see what the different scorings come out to.
Yeah, I only moderate debates. I have no skill in actually scoring them.
How was it? Because I'm interested in that whole aspect of it. How was it when you guys met, kind of beforehand and then after? You know, because there was a lot of tension towards the end of it. Did you guys have any interaction following the debate?
Oh yes, yeah. For example, I said something that was incorrect in the debate, and I realized after the fact, and so I told him later. I was like, oh, I wanted to tell you, like I'm sorry. Well, the thing I said in the debate was actually false. I think I put it on my blog too. But I was like, yeah, I'm totally sorry. Like I got that thing wrong. It was nothing that had really to do with the debate, but it was just some factual issue. And he was like shocked and surprised that I would go through the trouble of correcting myself and apologizing for saying something incorrect.
That's what happens. That's what happens when you're not familiar with intellectual honesty.
I have that impression. He comes across, Richard. You can't see the real guy, right? He comes across as a very fake person when you're interacting with him. Like
right.
It's facade, right? Like, and it's kind of creepy and weird. And I'll give an example of it. And there's not really any way to describe it. It's a thing that you experience viscerally interacting with him. But there's one thing I can describe that will give you just a hint of the idea of what I'm talking about. Is that there was like a 2-hour drive, hour and a half drive back to the airport, I think the next day. And it was a Christian group, so it was a Christian van, and there was 2 Christian college students, and me and William in the front, and me and William Lane Craig in the back. And so it's basically an hour and a half of conversation. And 2 things happened in that. One was Craig asked me, like, because I had said something I think online at one point where I didn't think it was any point in trying to win a debate. Debate is really, the goal is not to win, the goal is to educate the audience. And so a technical win is less important to me than educating. And he was like, he flabbergasted by this. Is like, why would you go into a debate not intending to win? And it's like, well, you can't under the clock. Like, there's no way you can win a debate because the clock stops. Like, it's like it's artificial. It's not like when the clock stops that you don't have more arguments to make. It's not like that proves that you can't. Oh, clearly you have no rebuttal. And it's like, no, I just ran out of time, right? So those kinds of things, right? And
it's like technique.
The technicality of it, like you might like forget a point in an oral debate that you'll remember when you do a written debate or something like that. So I think oral debates are just they're not. There's no point in trying to win them, like because that's just a technical rhetorical device that has no correspondence with reality in terms of what's true or false. For me, the advantage and the value of debate is to state facts and get information and ways of thinking and ways of looking at things out to the audience that they will never have heard before, and it'll get them thinking so that when they leave, they'll go like, well, that's not what I was told, or that actually I never thought of it that way. And then they start thinking about it more, or they start researching it more. If they start thinking about it more and researching it more on their own, they're going to end up where I am. Like, I know that already. So that's my goal. And Craig just couldn't get his head around this. He was just flabbergasted. It's like, I just don't understand why. Like, why wouldn't you just try to win the debate? And it's like,
Richard, let me
that
ask you
told me
about
so
that.
much about him, right? It's like he is there to win.
Well,
right?
that's my question.
He's not really interested in truth or education. He's there to win and to evangelize.
So Richard,
and this is one thing.
Richard, you do believe very hard, because I've watched a lot of these debates, and I've got the after watching so much William Lane Craig stuff, I think that he doesn't give a damn about the stuff anymore. It's a winner at all cost.
Yeah,
I've seen him use dishonest techniques, exactly like the one you mentioned. Oh, well, you notice my opponent didn't respond to this. He was done. You did your rebuttal, you did close up, or he'll pick up 5 other points.
Yeah, no. That's what what you just described are actually trained tactics that are taught you in professional debate. And he was actually a pro debater before he was an evangelist. So that's one thing that people don't know about Craig versus no one else on the debate circuit in atheism or theism was doing debate professionally, academically, like real debate scene before they became an atheist or a theist or whatever debater. He has tons of experience. He's just going through the script. He knows the art. He knows the rhetoric. He knows how to game the system. That's the thing about him, right? And if people don't know that going in, they think he looks amazing. Like, wow, this is amazing. So actually, he's kind of tricking you. It's all prestidigitation, right? But it's very skillful. You got to give him that. Like, he's applying the skill. But the other thing that was weird. Let me tell you the other thing that was weird though on that van drive to the airport is there was a moment where one of the Christian students, I think it was the passenger, just as if spontaneously said, "So, Dr. Craig, how did you come to Christ?" And then he goes into a spiel answering this, which I recognize because it's verbatim the answer he always gives to this question. And I'm like, and that like was creepy, like the hairs on the back of my neck going up. I was like taken out of the like as if an out of body experience. I'm really like, oh my God, they set this up. Like, there's no way the Christian student who's a huge fan of William and Craig does not know the story of how William and Craig came to Christ, right? So that was just a softball he deliberately swung whatever through at him to try and like, maybe he'll tell his story and I'll be moved by this, as if I've never heard that story either. And it was just verbatim, and he was just orating it, right? Like not even like personal conversation. And I was like,
it's like
this
a practice
is creepy
speech
and weird. Yeah. I think that tells you part of it. And that ties into what happened in my debate. Someone pointed out later, and I didn't notice this at the time, but someone pointed this out later.
You need to have audience plans.
Right. Yeah. Well, and you can make good use of that. I've done that. I've done softballing for debate, people who are in debates before, where you know the right question to ask them in Q&A to help them answer a point that didn't get answered in the thing. So there are legitimate uses for that tactic, but that was really like trying to manipulate me. That's the thing. It was really like kind of dishonest in a way. But the other thing is, if people have seen Craig's debates, he usually does such a good job. He's wrapped up so that in his closing, he can just burn it, evangelizing. He'll just say like, here's why you should come to Christ. So just his little gospel message, right? Because he's got so much time left because he's, dispatched the opponent. But in my debate, he didn't do that. And I didn't notice he didn't do that. He burned his entire closing, just in every single second of it, trying to rebut things that I had said earlier. And someone pointed out, and then there was a student came up, and there was another softball question. The student says, Dr. Craig, usually by the end of your debate, you've given your messages, evangelism, like you talked about, promoting the gospel and stuff. Would you like to do that now? And this is in Q&A. And so he does it. And it's the exact same verbatim thing that he does in every debate. And then someone pointed this out to me later, and they go, you know what? That shows you had him against the ropes, because he ran out of time too. He didn't have time to get to his little gospel spiel, and he had someone in the audience to like swing the ball at him so that he could pull it in at Q&A. And I was like, oh my God.
But like
it just tells you everything you need to know.
That's awesome.
And I got to tell you, I like actually when I've seen debates where that person tries some kind of technique to run out the clock or not talk or add 5 more other things, and they start the Q&A, and the persons in the audience recognize that, and the first question they do is do that softball thing to the other person to get them to try to address the other stuff that the guy brought up, and I think that's perfectly fine. I think that's great.
I support that tactic.
Before we move on to the people in the audience who have questions, I just have one more very important question, Dr. Carrier.
Yeah.
You have a fan group on Facebook called Get Richard Carrier on the Colbert Report, right?
I do know about this. Yeah. I haven't looked at it, but I know
I want you to do them a favor. They are still posting to this day. I don't think they've gotten the memo that Colbert is no longer. Right. There's a post from 2 days ago. So, Dr. Carrier, will you take this opportunity to let them know that?
No, I think anyone else can do that. I got better things to do. Someone else can take care of that one. That's a straightforward, verifiable statement of fact. I think anybody can handle that. They don't need me.
Somebody else can do the
all right, Steve.
Okay.
Back to you.
All right, thanks, man. So, anyways, we want to do a couple of little quick Q&A. I don't know how much time you have. We already
how long do you want to go?
Oh well, right now we're 1 hour in. I think. I don't know, 30 more minutes or so.
Sure. Yeah.
You hang in there. I know you had a rough night. You said before.
That wasn't me. No.
Somebody had not slept well.
It was Heretic.
That would be me.
Heretic is a rough night every night.
That would be me.
Heretic always.
Well, okay.
Yeah. She
it was worse than normal. Okay.
I could be like 4 o'clock in the morning. Oh, I'm bored. Who am I going to talk to? I'll message Heretic.
Yeah, right.
I don't usually go to bed till about 7 in the morning. But but yesterday I wasn't feeling well, and I slept at like midnight till 4 in the morning, and then I wasn't sleepy till like 11. Right. I guess it was about 9 o'clock this morning, and then I slept through my alarm, and yeah.
All right, so let's we got the Q&A. So in the live feed, if you have some questions, post them now. You can also send them to me by other means if they're longer than something that you can't write in our little 200 character limit that we have in our live feed at the moment. So,
Steve, while we're waiting, can I drop in another one?
oh, by all means, yeah.
Richard, the topic that I'd like to have you talk a little bit about is support from other biblical scholars, because that seems to be the thing that your critics will run to the quickest. That is, you're alone. And of course you're not alone. But yeah. that whole idea. So specifically, we've got the situation with Thomas L. Thompson, right, where he showed that the patriarchs did not exist, was completely rejected, thrown out of scholarship, everything. And that situation seems to be happening again, if I can say so. So
except they can't punish me. That's the thing. I'm outside academia already. So that really frustrates the fuck out of them. I have to tell you, like, they can't get me disinvited from conferences or fired from my jobs. It's like, oh, well.
Right. But there are a lot of other people who could be, right? And
absolutely.
Is where do we stand? We, the mythicist community, if you will. Where do we stand in terms of making progress in getting outing more people as being supportive of the idea, of the notion, if you will?
Yeah, in a sense, it's, Thomas Paine's statement, time makes more converts than reason. You just have to wait for all the old geezers to die, and then the younger generation moves in. It's the Kuhn argument, right? It's like the paradigm shift requires this kind of, the people who are really stubborn and stuck in their ways. It's the young upstart scholars who are the ones who change everything and actually move the field forward. And that kind of happened with the Thomas Thompson thing, right? Is like really the people who were against. It wasn't like his peers suddenly saw the light and said, "Oh, you know what? Yeah, we agree with you." No, it's they basically just died off. And then a younger generation of scholars came up, having read his works and engaged with them, and go, "Yeah, actually, this makes a lot of sense." And they weren't pushed into those ruts, and so that they could actually they were more malleable. They could actually think more freely by the time they got settled into academia. And so once they were there, then they became influential. So that's why it took decades, right? And so that may be the case here, but it may be a little faster. It depends, though. We do have the problem that, of course, the fundamentalist biblical scholars will never be on board, right? They'll never grant this. They'll never concede. It doesn't matter how much evidence you have. And so you really got to look at the secular scholars and the Christian scholars who are liberal enough that they're willing to accommodate a mythical Jesus. Thomas Brodie is a rare example where he's Catholic, a believing Catholic, and yet argues for the non-existence of Jesus because he thinks like, well, the Gospels are really just a message from God about how we should live our lives. It doesn't really matter whether Jesus existed or not. Literally, and that's actually true. If you think in terms of like what the goals of the religion should be, you really don't need an actual Jesus. What you need is to believe that this is the message from God about how you should live your life and how you get salvation and stuff. Right. And so, and it's weird to see that from a Catholic, but it's even more likely to see that from a Universalist or a really liberal Episcopalian or something like that. So, so I think so you look at the liberal Christian scholars, maybe some Jewish scholars, and the secular scholar community. Those are the ones you want to look at, right? See, where are they going? And how much can they be punished by the other group? Because it's like about 2 to 1 in terms of ratio, right? There's about 2 hardcore Christian scholars or money purse holders in biblical studies for every secularist, and that's probably, it might be 3 to 1. Like it's pretty high. It's pretty skewed. And so the ones who are very much against the idea of like it's going to be really embarrassing if we start admitting that it's acceptable to think Jesus didn't exist. And so you're going to get a lot of pushback on that. And so where you see people, there's 2 groups that you see that are more amenable to this. Retired scholars who can't be punished. And so you have Philip Davies, who is a believer in historicity. He's a believing Christian. And he has said, he's gone on the record, he's even chastised Bart Ehrman about this. And he says, look, this theory that Jesus didn't exist is actually plausible. I don't think it's correct, but it's at least as respectable as any of the other wild theories that get promoted in this thing, like Jesus was a zealot warrior or something like that, right? There's a lot of stuff that really passes muster.
Korean Jesus, where he's like all buffed up.
Yeah.
But so, anyways, we got question overload. I didn't realize the overwhelming response for questions, and so it was like
we got a bunch. Let's
actually to get through. So I just took random 3 or actually 4 3. We'll be here till like next Thursday, which is fine with me, but I'm sure Richard has other things he'd rather be doing right now, probably. But anyway, so the first question, and again, let's see if we can not spend too much time on each one because these are kind of deep questions. But the first one,
are you going to start with Vlad the Impaler?
Yeah. Okay.
I do want to ask you a question.
Let's do this one first.
I want to ask you a quick question, real quick.
I don't know anything about the historicity of Vlad the Impaler. I don't know the field or the documents or anything like that, so I can't.
Can you comment on the historicity of him being a vampire?
I'll say it has a low prior probability.
Okay.
I don't know beyond that.
Wait. You were talking earlier about a class of hero, and you mentioned that class of hero that Jesus kind of would belong to. But you said there were like 14 of them. What is that class of hero again? Can we write it down in the side chat? And secondly, what are some examples of heroes that are in that category?
Obviously, I have a whole section on this and on the historicity of Jesus. So if you want the documentation, it's the rank.
I actually have a copy of that book. I just haven't read it yet. So it's
the rank Raglan hero class.
Okay.
There's different ways, but it's rank and Raglan. Their wording was incongruent with their assignments of attributes, so I cleaned up their wording to match what they actually assigned, but actually made them more generic in that respect. So they're so they find basically 14 or more people in history, ancient history, by the way. So we're not talking about other periods of history because things change in other periods. For relevant class, it's ancient period, Greco-Roman, Western history. And they find about 14 people who fit this class, and they have certain criteria the way they assign it to decide whether someone is in this class or not in this class. And I talk about that and updated. I even rescored it because I think they scored incorrectly, some of them.
I think Moses has an abnormally high score for some.
Yeah, Moses is actually a very typical example, which is another example. You could just say Jesus looks weirdly a lot like an updated Moses, right? Like Jesus looks like Moses in the same way that who's the hero of Romeo and Juliet looks like Romeo. I don't know. Did they name him Romeo in Romeo and West Side Story? I can't remember. But Jesus looks very much like an updated Moses. So if you think like, well, that's already a giveaway. Like, okay, that's a little suspicious. But yeah, Moses is in the class. Dionysus is in the class. Osiris is in the class. Hercules and so on. There are a variety of them. And the only value of the class is that it has a lot of members. So it's a really good proxy for how mythologized Jesus was. But Jesus is in a lot of other mythical classes as well, not just that one.
And so the Bayesian calculator says never pick 0. Is that
yes.
Real quick.
That's explained in the app.
I want to clarify that nobody in that
probability theory knows if you're assigning a 0 probability to something, you're doing something wrong, unless you're literally saying it's logically impossible.
Richard, but nobody in that rank has been bound to exist so far. Not one.
Say again? I couldn't.
Oh,
I couldn't hear
nobody in that rank Wrangling hero class has been found to exist so far.
Correct. Yeah.
Okay. All right, am I pronouncing that right? Rangian?
Rank Raglan.
Right.
So
Raglan. Okay.
Raglan.
Gotcha.
And rank as in rank.
As in stinks.
All right, so let's get to the next question.
I put it out into the live chat, and it's written in the side chat in here.
Yeah.
So
let's see. What
Thank you for your answer, by the way. I appreciate that.
Yeah. What's next?
Okay, so the next one. Question for Richard. I think this one was from our favorite, one of our favorite theists, General Han Solo. What's your thoughts on recent scholarship by Mike Heisner on the date of Christ's birth using Revelations 12 with astronomy software and the Second Temple texts that point to 11 September 3 BC? Okay. That's a lot. I don't know
if you can recall that specifically, but you know,
say it backwards. I don't know.
If this has been published under peer review anywhere, in any peer-reviewed journal, send me the article. Otherwise, please don't ask me the question.
Yeah, I don't know what that even means. So I'm just asking the questions.
It's clearly some weird Bible code thing where they're looking at Revelation 12 and trying to calculate astronomical events. It's no. Almost certainly this is just more tinfoil hat. But I'll take it seriously. If it's
it's
been published under peer review anywhere, I'll take it seriously and I'll write a blog about it. So otherwise, I'm really not interested in. And there's a million like tinfoil hat theories like that, but I'm just really not interested in.
So the theory is tinfoil, but like I said, the person who asked it, I didn't know was a very legit person.
Yeah. So in that case, maybe it is actually published under peer review. In that case, send me the article. I want to know about it. Yeah.
Okay. And the next one, this is from Shannon, one of our favorite YouTubers that has no content on her channel, but she has one of the more subs than most of us, I think, at this point. Yeah, we have a goal now. Everybody go to Shannon Q's channel and sub to her, and she's gonna be the highest subbed person on YouTube that has no content on her channel. It's gonna be like a Guinness Book of World Records. It's great. So Shannon asked Richard, I'm not kidding here. Ask Richard how he feels about people using the fact his PhD is in Greco-Roman history against his ability to research a different subject.
In Greco-Roman history.
Yeah.
No, I mean, it's the subject in Greco-Roman history. But anyway. Yeah. What is the New Testament written in? What language?
Greek.
I
got something right. I knew something.
Where did this happen? Where did these events occur? Roman Empire?
Roman Empire.
Yeah. No, I mean, come on. Yeah. That is silly. This is a no true Scotsman fallacy, and people try this all the time. Bart Ehrman even did it, like in the most unrespectable way, like trying to like say like I don't have the necessary hyper specific degree, and he was being so specific in his assignment of criteria that even his degree was not specific enough to qualify as being able to talk about historicity. I do this if people go for on my blog or even Google it. Richard Carrier, Bart Ehrman recap. I have a whole recap article on all our debates. Ehrman and I, these not direct debates, not a formal oral debate, but all of our interchanges and stuff and arguments. And I have a complete summary with links and all that stuff. One of which is exactly this argument, the hyper-specific degree argument. And I have a little summary of it, and you can click through it. You can read a more detailed discussion of why this is a ridiculous thing to say. And that will answer that question as well in general.
I do think it's funny that when you have it's again, Roman history, and yeah, that it's almost like you don't have the tools from the study of history in order to find out answers to these questions from getting a PhD. Like clearly you got a PhD.
Yeah.
You had to figure out some method
valid
to researching history at some point or another. I mean, I just have a fucking bachelor's in history, but I know at least limitedly, not to the extent that you do, but at least to some extent how to get information about history.
Well, let me give you a valid version of that argument, right? So G.A. Wells wrote several books, not under peer review, but he wrote several books famously arguing that Jesus didn't exist. He wrote many books on this, so people know. If you go researching it, you'll see G.A. Wells. His PhD was in German literature of the early 20th century. And well, okay, that's a valid point. Like he's not actually an expert in ancient history. He doesn't really have command of the languages or the cultural context and the literary context and all of that. That's a fair point. And the reason, though, there is a connection is that because he was a professor and a PhD of early 20th century German literature, he was an expert in all the German authors in the early 20th century who argued Jesus didn't exist. And that's where he got the idea and was basically just revamping and updating their arguments. But it is valid to say, like, well, actually, we would need to see this from someone who has a more appropriately assigned degree because he doesn't have the right background knowledge to really handle this competently. He does all right, but there are like little things you could point out where, like, if he knew the field, he would not make this mistake, etc.
Joseph Atwill might be another example.
Well, Atwill has no degrees, so that's not a good example.
All right, so, I want to make sure that we're clear on this because you have a degree from I remember Columbia University, not from Patriot Bible University.
Correct.
Right?
Yeah.
Okay. Just making sure. And your thesis did not start off. I want to clarify. Your thesis did not start off. Hi, my name is Richard Carrier. I've been teaching high school science for 15 years. Okay. I want to make that clear and get that on record.
Yes.
And one criticism that gets thrown at me when I cite you as a source, well, he's fringe. And I think that's just so ridiculous. But is that something that you get thrown at you?
You know you're fringe though, right?
Oh, I mean, every paradigm change is fringe at some point. Like every new development, every update. So it's not really a relevant point to make. And It's similar to people constantly citing the consensus and not asking what the consensus is even based on, right? Like if the consensus just becomes like this rhetoric that is, as you say, like whatever the consensus says can never be wrong. Well, you're saying that there can never be progress in knowledge, right? You're basically arguing for dogma, not scholarship. Yes. And that's the thing. That's the point of getting this theory published through peer review. It makes sense to say like, well, there's none of this stuff has survived peer review, so we should go with the consensus of actual peer-reviewed experts. That's a sensible argument. But when you actually get a version of this argument through peer review, the whole point of that is to say, okay, now we have an acceptable, serious challenge to the consensus. The consensus now needs to weigh in on this. They need to actually read it, confront it, deal with it honestly. A lot of critics have not dealt with it honestly. And like, it's time for a new consensus review. You can't just say the consensus is against this, therefore it's false, because that simple methodology would mean that you could never change any opinion in scholarship. Nothing could ever, you would never come to the conclusion that Moses didn't exist. That would never be the mainstream view. Nothing would ever change. So you can't have progress in knowledge if you take that argument. What you need to say is like, okay, the consensus says one thing, this new peer-reviewed research study says another thing. Now we need the consensus to re-examine itself and say, does the consensus hold up in the face of this? And that requires scholars to actually read the book and engage with it and actually produce, expert and honest responses to it. And that really hasn't happened yet. There haven't really been honest, fair, actually genuinely appropriate responses to it. It's mostly rhetoric and attempts to try and explain away why they shouldn't read it. Rather than
it might take like a few more historians to publish things that are similar to what you're putting forward to really get that to happen. Because right now, I think it's you and Price are really the serious historians that are putting forward these ideas.
Yeah, there's Raphael Lataster, who has a PhD in religious studies. He's now in our ranks, and there are a few other scholars who agree. They're historicity agnostics. So you have Hector Avalos is an agnostic on the historicity of Jesus. And there are a few others. I keep an updated list on the Richard Carey, Bart Ehrman recap article that I have on my blog. Item 22 there I list the 7, or I think it's 8 now, 8 scholars who are at least historicity agnostics who have degrees in relevant fields. And there are a few others who are think that our view is plausible even if they aren't on board with it. So we have like Zeba Crook. And,
you should have a big
Philip
button on the front of your page. It says, "How fringe am I?" An updated like, this is
chronological clock showing like the graph as it changes.
Exactly.
Yeah,
and then you can also have like a big warning level, like the terrorist scale. Just be like, once we hit red, guys, I'm not fringe anymore.
This is 5 question going on, so you can interview your perspective.
Might go along with the consensus and flow, right? But we got one more question. Go, Dave. You want to add something real quick before I do my last question here, Dave?
Oh,
Dave,
are you talking about
there's a little bit of lag, so.
For Richard, is the destruction of Jerusalem 70 AD only understood through Josephus? Why trust Josephus?
No, we have other.
That was from the chat.
Yeah. I mean, even apart from archaeology, so we have a lot of archaeology on this, not just in Jerusalem and in the Judean area, but we also have archaeology in Rome. So there's a lot of celebration of the destruction of Jerusalem in Roman architecture that was built on the proceeds of the loot acquired from it. And we have many other historians, Tacitus and various others, who mention the destruction of Jerusalem, or at least mention the Jewish war in any case. It's not just Josephus. No historian trusts any ancient historian implicitly. We treat them critically. So you look at it, and there's certain things, and it's the same kind of reasoning. Like some statements belong to a certain reference class where it's usually when someone says this, they're telling the truth. Some statements belong to a class where you say, like, well, usually when someone says this, they're not telling the truth. And so you look at that and you have the priors, and then you look outside Josephus and see, can we update these priors in reference to any external evidence? And in some cases you can, in some cases you can't. And that's literally, I've just described to you my job, how historians do their work. So that's how we approach sources. So if you're just talking about the destruction of Jerusalem, yes, we have sources, and we have archaeological evidence. We have lots of other evidence. We have numismatic evidence. We have lots of things besides that we can use to corroborate Josephus. Now, you could quibble over maybe, like, I don't know, like if you're going to try and challenge the exact year it happened, you would really have to put something through peer review to argue that and say, like, here's the evidence shows that it could be vague. I don't know. I'm not aware of anyone challenging that, so it seems unlikely.
Well, we got one last question for you. This one is actually from a PhD friend of mine in particle physics. So what the hell does he know about the Bible? So we're talking about PhDs and compartmentalization here. No, he's actually really, really smart. This one, again, probably way beyond something I would ever understand. So please dumb it down for me here. But he says, on the historicity of Jesus, you note that the Jews would not have been put off by this, quote, symbolic cannibalism in the Last Supper narrative. It seems to me instead that this means that the tradition was shoehorned in from a pagan source and is simply gaining familiarity among the marginal Jews that later founded Christianity. Your opinion?
That's a plausible hypothesis. I think it's hard to prove, but it's entirely plausible. I think it's wrong to say that that's impossible. But we don't know. It could be an inherent evolution of Jewish thinking, because they have the similar thing where they have the consuming of the Passover lamb, right? So there's the role of the flesh and blood of the lamb. Now, you don't literally drink the blood of the lamb. You put it on your doorpost, and then you partake of the meal of the lamb. So there's this idea existed, but you also had the pagan idea. You had, the grapes of the blood of the blood and flesh of Bacchus. You've got certain other things like that. So the concepts are out there. And so I think it's plausible to say that this idea was around when the Christians were first coming up with it. They may have been subconsciously influenced by it. They may have been consciously influenced by it and sought to develop a Jewish way of doing it. And so this idea of the symbolic, drinking of the blood and eating of the flesh could have been a pagan import. And I think, I might say that that's the most plausible theory as far as we know. But it's also possible that it is something that they came up with that made more sense from a Jewish angle than we think. So we just don't really know because we only have the end product. We only see it in Paul talking about it and already taking it for granted. We don't see the development of it. We don't see if it was based on anything that existed in the sect that became Christian later. Because clearly this was a sect that existed before they had the revelations of Jesus. What did that sect believe? We don't have the literature from that sect. So there's a lot we don't know. So I'm wary of asserting a fact. But you also can't assert the contrary fact. You can't say that it's not even possible or plausible that this is a pagan import that's been Judaized. That's entirely plausible. That may well, in fact, be what happened.
I think that's a great way to actually start bringing this to a close. I know we've been definitely going on for about 90 minutes. Somebody asked more about paganism. Richard is actually going to be back with us on the 28th. We're going to be working out to whom maybe trying to do maybe a 1-1 with somebody with him on a specific topic. So let's kind of table that for right now for the person who wants to talk more about paganism. I really want to get down on that topic one of these days, but unfortunately we're kind of running out of time here. But Richard, like I said, has been gracious enough to come back and join us. Although after his experience today, he might have changed his mind. But
not at all.
He heard us playing guitar before he came in and went, "Oh, what the heck!" Like just watching.
No, that was great. Yeah, actually, no, I'm totally keen to come back.
Awesome. So Kyle,
I definitely want you to put that big fringe button on the front of your page, though.
I think
that's awesome.
I really do. I think it's a great idea. Nothing wrong with being a little fringe. You know what? If you don't form your own path and you just walk the same path as everybody else, then you're never going to forge ahead. I think you've got to you got to go away from the pack a little bit.
In all honesty, I think that you handled that question really well because it's like you are fringe. You're admitting it. You're actually kind of embracing it and explaining why it's actually important to listen to somebody who's fringe in an area because we're talking about what the evidence is, and that if you are fringe, then there should be answers to a lot of the questions you're putting forward. And I think that's a good position.
And there's one thing about being fringe just because you're saying something and being fringe with evidence.
Yeah, that kind of helps. But all right, so Kyle, you want to wrap this up a little bit? Kyle has some announcements to make and things of that nature. Go ahead, take it away.
Do you want to? I'm gonna start with our next episode, and you can pull that image up while I'm doing that. I
have it ready to go.
Okay. Tomorrow evening, Steve and I will be sitting down to have a discussion with Aaron Ra, and that episode will be airing on Monday. We also on Monday. Monday's going to be a big day. We have a very interesting debate. If you remember, about 2 episodes ago, we had Pamela Whistle, who was the membership director of the American Atheists. And a long time ago, probably about 3 years ago, a man named G-Man made a claim that atheists do not exist. So we have talked Pam into agreeing to have a debate one-on-one with G-Man about atheists. And this is true. This is true.
Is he a presuppositionalist?
He's not making. No.
No.
Oh, he's not that good.
Oh,
Holy crap! That's boom. That is an insult. Wow. Okay.
this could be the epic debate of all time. This could be bigger than the Matt Dillahunty Seitan Vertigate one.
It is.
It
is
just
fitting that that the man that made the claim that
atheists
do not exist, the director of the members of the people that he claims do not exist, will be debating him. So it's going to be
And
epic.
she's really enthused about this. She was so sweet. I got to tell you, one of my most favorite guests. She was very nice. We had a great. She was good. And if you haven't watched that podcast or listened to it yet, go download
You don't
it.
think the G-Man's just going to shout her down? Like,
No, I'm modding.
he's very aggressive.
No,
Yeah.
I mean, come on.
Okay.
She's
You
tough as
bet.
nails. I mean, she was nice, but she's tough as nails. You can
Oh,
listen to her in the, yeah.
I've seen him shout.
tough
I've
to
seen him
listen
shout down some pretty aggressive people. That's the reason. Why
No,
I'm asking.
it's not going to get. That won't happen. But it's going to be.
Okay.
Oh God, the whole argument that atheism doesn't exist is so strange to me. But oh well.
And also,
All right, go ahead.
while this this hangout was going on, we our shows are on a platform called Anchor.fm. If you have a Android or an iPhone, you can. It's kind of like customized, really easy podcasting in a quick hurry. And we were, when we started this hangout, we were in the top 5,000. And Steve, if you'll scroll down to the bottom, by about 10 minutes ago, we had entered the top 500. So, great show. Excellent.
So there we
thanks
go.
everybody. Thanks for supporting, and we appreciate you guys listening and viewing. And if you have any feedback or ideas, feel free to let us know.
So literally, as of 3 hours ago, we made the top 500. I mean, I think almost 200 people were listening to one podcast at the same time just a little while ago. What was it? 167. We've had 1,000 downloads almost of our episodes. We had 6,500 views of our
thanks, guys.
debate with Ken Hovind. One of our debates with Kev Hovind. So thank you guys very much for the support you've been giving to the Non-Sequitur show. The comments have been astronomically in favor and positive and fun, and I'm enjoying reading all of them. And so, you have anything else to announce there, Kyle?
Nope. I was just going to thank Dr. Carrier for taking the time to talk with us, and we look forward to the 28th.
Yeah, you bet.
Absolutely. And so all you guys have been hanging in here for the last 90 minutes. I know a couple of you said this is too short. I get it, but I think 90 minutes is good enough to take care of some of these topics. And you know what? Always leave them wanting a little bit more. But you guys have been a fantastic audience. The live feed was going crazy. Great comments, great questions. And Dr. Carey, I wanted to appreciate immensely your taking your time to come in and have fun with us, because this was really enjoyable. And I'm really looking forward to the podcast that we have on the 28th.
Yeah, thank you.
Good night, all. Good night, everybody.